Nobody wants to go to jail, but if you get sentenced, you don't really have a choice in the matter. However, not everyone is willing to just accept this fact. Some paint over their faces with black markers, others fake their own death, or even get plastic surgery. Basically, there are people willing to do anything to avoid prosecution. Can you guess how many of these criminals have succeeded? You'll get to find out from our video today. In 2012, Alan Knight of Swansea, Wales, found himself in a sticky situation after he stole a little over $50,000 from a neighbor with dementia. His future seemed bleak and a prison sentence seemed inevitable, but he still tried to figure out a way to avoid imprisonment. So what did Knight do? His idea was definitely worthy of a man who stole money from a dementia patient. He got himself admitted to a hospital, pretending to have a serious illness. For 10 weeks, Knight pretended to be in a coma. He lay without moving and without opening his eyes for over 2 months. When he was discharged, Knight continued his performance. When the police came to his house, where he lived with his wife Helen, he was hooked up to a life support machine and continued to pretend to be in a coma. But the doctors and the police saw through it, although not completely. Knight managed to convince several hospital doctors of his illness. Helen even wrote a petition to the Prime Minister, demanding for Knight's charges to be dropped. Moreover, the couple managed to convince a local MP who got personally involved in the difficult case. All the Knights had to do was continue pretending that Alan was in a coma, and the authorities wouldn't have been able to put him in jail. But the truth always comes out eventually, and this case was no exception. The police saw the footage from the CCTV cameras that showed Alan pushing a cart around the store with his wife Helen. Then they checked Alan's personal computer and found photos from the couple's lovely vacation by the sea. When the truth was uncovered in 2014, Alan Knight got 2 more years added to his sentence, so he went to prison for a total of 4.5 years. And the local MP who helped Helen admitted that Alan's coma was always fake. But it's hard to blame him for being unable to tell the truth. He's a politician after all. Kimberly Dew got a speeding ticket in 2005. In order not to pay the fine, Dew stated that she had died in a car accident. A curious choice considering that she was speeding. She even published her own obituary in the newspaper, forging her mother's signature for it. If Kimberly had kept a low profile, perhaps her unusual idea would have actually worked. The truth surfaced when Kimberly was pulled over for speeding again just a month later. A local lawyer noted that by trying to evade paying the initial fine, Kimberly committed a much more serious crime, thus turning a $500 fine into a 5-year prison sentence. At least she won't be speeding anymore. A woman in China found herself in a tricky situation in 2011. She was facing 9 years in prison for theft, but it was an unusual lawsuit. The woman was pregnant at the time, and therefore, the judge allowed her to start serving her sentence outside of prison. Women in China don't get sent to prison if they are pregnant or breastfeeding. By law, the breastfeeding period lasts until the baby turns 1 year old, so the woman gets a deferment for a whole year. You have to agree. If you were to find yourself in a similar situation, you'd also want to postpone going to prison. That's what the woman wanted, so she decided to get pregnant at the end of each breastfeeding period so as not to go to jail. Thus, she managed to give birth to 5 children within 10 years. After a decade of back-to-back pregnancies, during which the woman committed other crimes, her luck ran out. When she failed to conceive at the end of the 5th breastfeeding period, the woman panicked. Fearing prison, she decided to go on the run. The woman was immediately put on the wanted list and was soon found at her neighbor's house. However, she wasn't the only one to have pulled off such a stunt. Another Chinese woman got pregnant 13 times in 10 years, from 2005 to 2015, all to avoid going to jail. The 2 women deferred their sentence by a total of 20 years with 18 pregnancies. In 2005, a man named Mr. Zheng got into a violent argument with his wife's uncle, Mr. Cao, and the situation got out of hand. When Mr. Cao, let's say, disappeared, Zheng realized that the police would soon come looking for him, which meant that his only option was to go on the run. He took the name Wang Yu and pretended to be a mute beggar. He probably had some other options, but he never doubted his decision and avoided arrest for 12 years by living as Wang Yu. He settled in a village north of Hangshu, where he began working in construction, got married, and even had a child. But don't forget that Wang was mute, which, as you might have guessed, meant that the man didn't say a single word to anyone during the time he was on the run. It wasn't until 2017 that Wang's life collapsed when the truth was revealed. It happened when the police were conducting a household survey. The officers got suspicious because of Wang's lack of identification documents. After taking a sample of his blood to run a DNA test, they found out that this supposedly mute man was actually Zheng, a suspect in a 2005 murder case. But then, something truly strange happened. When the man was asked why he decided not to speak for 12 years, he opened his mouth and said nothing. Since he had been silent for over 10 years, his vocal cords had wasted away, and now he was truly mute. One evening, the police got a call about two men trying to break into a house in Carroll, Iowa. When the police stopped a car matching the description, they saw Matthew McNeely and Joey Miller wearing a very unusual disguise. The men didn't have ski masks or stockings that thieves usually put on their heads. Instead of that, McNeely and Miller opted for a do-it-yourself option and painted their faces with permanent markers. The results looked hilarious. The police chief said that he had never seen anything like it before, calling the case strange and funny at the same time. When the unfortunate thieves were convicted and sent to jail, their feelings were written, or rather drawn, across their faces. In 2009, the twins Satish and Sabarish Raj were accused of a serious crime: international drug trafficking. Satish and Sabarish were from Malaysia, which has some of the strictest laws on drug trafficking and smuggling. If the Malaysian government catches a person trafficking drugs, they just don't end up in prison, but they are often sentenced to death. However, it wasn't that simple in the case of Satish and Sabarish. Although they were both arrested, the investigators knew that only one of the twins was guilty of the crime, but couldn't figure out which one. Identical brothers have identical DNA, so even the DNA evidence didn't help find out who the criminal actually was. The police hoped that one of the brothers would confess under the pressure of tough interrogations, but the twins saw through the detective's plan and decided not to say anything. Although the judge was sure that one of them was guilty of the crime, he couldn't send the wrong person to be executed. By refusing to snitch on each other, Satish and Sabarish got an acquittal. Thus, these smart brothers proved that having a twin can be very useful. Surveillance cameras have forced criminals to invent new approaches to disguising themselves. If a person is robbing a house, like this Quanzhou resident in China, they need to figure out a way to get past the cameras without being identified, or they risk making a hasty and ill-considered decision. In this video, the thief arrives without any disguise, but then he notices the security camera and realizes that he needs to hide his face. So he quickly leaves and returns 20 minutes later looking like this. I wonder if the guard thought it was a ghost or not. To hide his face, the robber, or rather the intruder, since he never actually managed to get anything from the house, decided to simply cover himself with a white sheet. It would have worked on Halloween, but since it wasn't October, it simply looks stupid. The man was tracked down by the police, taken into custody, and interrogated. He confessed to a number of other crimes too. Changing one's face is a pretty good idea, but what about changing one's age? A woman in her 40s tried to get away from the police in China's Henan province. She took a taxi and then a bus to get to a village. But she didn't know that the police had been following her the whole time. However, when the police caught the woman, they noticed that something had changed in her appearance, and it wasn't something minor. she actually looked very different. By cutting her hair and dyeing it gray, the woman changed her appearance and pretended to be an elderly woman. Cutting one's hair, turning it gray, and portraying a sweet old woman is a rather unconventional approach, but such a disguise failed to deceive the vigilant officers, and the woman was detained immediately. The Walmart in Oregon is no different from other Walmarts in the US, but on July 5th, this store was at the center of an incredibly serious crime that involved teenagers. A group of 13 to 15-year-old teenagers stole some Pokemon cards. After the local school inspector identified them on the camera footage, the teenagers made a mistake and returned to Walmart a couple of days later. This time, the police knew who to look for, and thus the chase began. The teenagers ran away with the stolen cards, and the police followed them. One of the young men ran out into the driveway, and since the cops were close, decided to avoid getting caught by jumping into a trash can. It was 32 degrees Celsius on that day, so the trash was terribly hot and smelly, but it actually helped. The police officers ran past the garbage cans, asking some children to point in the direction where the teenagers went. The officers left without suspecting anything. After waiting for a little bit, the young man carefully got out of the trash can and left the place as if nothing happened. Unfortunately, he was tracked down and arrested an hour later, but he was very close to avoiding arrest by hiding in the trash can. Friends, that's all for today. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time.